to talk today about audiences, and I want to talk from the perspective of a business that has built a relatively large audience in a reasonably short time. I'm hoping that people in the room know the Lad Bible. 49% of all 18 to 24-year-old men in the UK follow the Lad Bible. Now, I've been around media for a little while. I'm not certain that I can think of other brands that had half of a particular population in their audience. I want to talk, our business has large reach, big engagement. We serve about 1,000 years, a millennia of video viewing, of aggregated short form every month. Those are some big numbers, and if you can get your head around that big number and do the maths this morning, you might have got a bigger head than me. I actually want to talk just about one number in this slide, and it's one of the smallest numbers, and it's 18. 18% of the 18 to 24-year-old following, 18% of the 18 to 24 females in the UK also follow the Lad Bible. And bearing in mind that this is a relatively male proposition, it's a male audience. I actually can't think of female brands that can claim to have that scale of audience. So there is something in the proposition, in what we do, that brings people in almost across the gender divide. When we look at our audiences, we arrange our audience in buckets. So it's 13 to 17, 18 to 24, and 35 plus. And actually something really interesting happens at the very early 13 to 17 age. These centennials or Generation Z or whatever you want to call them, 13 to 17-year-olds I'm obsessed by. I think that they are going to be a bomb inside the building of media and publishing. And when we look at our 13 to 17-year-olds, a really interesting thing happens. Everywhere else in our user base, the ratio of women to men is 1 to 3. And in the 13 to 17-year-olds, it's 1 to 2. And, we have some ideas about why that happens. I think it's quite interesting. I think it has something to do with the fact that our content is generous, it's inclusive, and our tone is optimistic. I don't have time to go through all of these different stories, but I'll just take a quick canter through. So I picked these stories because they are very, very representative. For our audience, these stories, for each of these stories, I could have found another 40 stories that were not dissimilar. Down at this guy, his daughter had to have she was deaf, so she had to have a cochlear implant, and she was really self-conscious about it. So this dad had his head shaved, and he had a cochlear implant tattooed on his head. Here's a guy who is a bit of a computer geek. He's Scottish, and he builds a computer, and he builds a cooling system made from iron brew, because that's his favorite drink. Up here we have a much more serious story. These are two guys who were on a civilian watch point, and they stopped a suicide bomber from entering a mosque. And this is one of the last shots of them. They were tragically killed, and it was an incredibly sad story. For us on that, we brought an audience of 500,000 people, saw that story on our page. 60,000 people shared it. The story above is one I think that is why we have such a strong positive female contingent, which means that our environment is not, it's not exclusively male, it's not a male ghetto. It is an environment where men like and women feel comfortable. Girl, she was playing rugby and she got her nose smashed in, and instead of coming off, she actually stayed on, and she saved a try, or some complicated rugby thing that I don't really understand. The point is, we put really strong stories about ordinary people, all of these stories about heroes, and we put those in front of a very large audience, and that drives engagement from both men and women. Okay, oh yeah. So that's our content approach. Just want to take you through a small amount about our commercial approach. From our perspective, Greed is not a long-term business strategy. Fleecing your audience at every time you meet them is not going to work. For us, quality user experience and improving user experience is part of our DNA. When we serve video, of which we serve a lot, if you come to us, we serve you one mobile video ad per day. We're capped at one. We could probably sell the inventory on 5, 10 times that. We serve you one video ad per day, per user, no matter how much content you choose to consume. Things that we do, we don't serve you that ad in front of a piece of content that's less than 45 seconds. All our videos click to view. We don't autoplay you here, there, and everywhere. Things that we don't do, we don't serve you a whole kind of fake amount of recommended content and then use that just to serve up an autoplay. We get between 85 and 90% viewability, of which we're very proud. And if we had one plea to agencies and creatives in the room, we'd say, in mobile, you need shorter format creative ads. We want a 10-second ad, because then, you know what, we might play a couple more ads to our audience. A 30-second ad, 30 seconds on your mobile phone, they're like dog years. You know, by the time you've watched a 30-second ad on your mobile phone, you're 997, you're not a happy customer. And, you know, somewhere along that process, half the people decide, I'd rather eat my own hair than watch the rest of this ad. And I'm one of those people. People ask, how did the Lad Bible get to be so big? I mean, we are a very large media publisher that reaches a very difficult to reach audience. And a part of that is the things that I talked about before. It's about to do with the tone, and it's to do with our approach to monetization. I think the other part is that somewhere around 3.5 years ago, the world changed. The world changed, and it's never, ever changing back. The combination of three things, one is mobile phones that are smartphones and that are virtually ubiquitous, manageable pricing packages for your data, and the rise of social networks like Facebook, Twitter, more recently Instagram and Snapchat. They allowed something to happen that had never happened before. I don't think even us, even in this room, even people who deal in this environment every day really understand what social media really is. Social media, the power of it is because it allows the world to speak for itself. Social media, that sound, is people speaking for themselves. And if you think about it, and if you've been in media, you'll come to the realization that this has never really happened before. You know, even 10 years ago, publishers told you what they thought you ought to know, and we listened. And that was the global conversation. There was nothing additional. But what we now know is that people want to spend a lot more of their time and give a lot more of their attention to people who are similar to them, who like the same things, who care about the same things, and who are part of that same conversation. And it's my view that publishers who understand that and brands who understand that and can be comfortable in that environment, who can be positive participants in that community and use their power to make that community a stronger, happier, better place, are going to find it very easy to build audiences. And publishers who don't, publishers and brands who have to talk to you from above or offer you, you know, unimpeachably beautiful people to sell you products that shame you into thinking that if you bought the bra, you're going to have perkier breasts and you're going to be a better person. I don't think that that is the conversation that's going to work in this space. The thing about what we're seeing most of all is we're seeing a generational shift. This is a complicated slide, and I don't know if you can really see all of it, but it's actually, that's not important. Ofcom every year put out a report, and they talked in the report that they put out this summer about the changing habits of young people. Young people, 12 to 15, have fundamentally different communication habits, even compared to really old people who are between 16 and 24. Now, this bottom slide, which I really like, this is a slide by an analyst called Benedict Evans at Andreessen Horowitz. I'm sure lots of people follow his blog and, like me, pretend to be much more intelligent because they've read it. Anderson Horowitz asked 11 to 15-year-olds, what would you miss the most? And they gave them the choice of mobiles and tablets, PCs, games consoles, TV sets, and other things. And it's moderately interesting to me that boys would miss games consoles, PCs, and mobile and tablets in about the same shape or ratio, and girls mainly would miss their mobile phones. But actually, that's not what I think is interesting about this slide. What I think is interesting about this slide is that 11 to 15-year-olds have all this stuff. This is their world. When I was 11, I had sellotape. I had sellotape, and I had a stick, and I had a spirograph. And that was and who had a spirograph? You know, that pin that you lost in the carpet, I spent the 80s looking for it. That was my childhood. I did not have any of this stuff. And the funny thing about 13 to 17-year-olds is they don't do what their parents did. When I was 11, I read newspapers to some extent, or maybe the cartoons at the backs of newspapers. I listened to the radio, I bought records, and my parents did all those things. They might have done them in a different way, but we did the same things. 11 to 17-year-olds now do things their parents don't understand. It's going to be very, 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 very difficult for all the people in this room to build businesses based on what we think these people are going to do. 11 to 17-year-olds are going to do stuff that we don't understand, and we're going to have to, and if we don't understand what they do, we're going to have a real problem. And the reason I think this group is a group that I'm actually obsessed with is because there's another thing about 13 to 17-year-olds. 13 to 17-year-olds are going to be first-time voters at the next election. They are going to use their world to detonate our world. And they are not going to get their news or their comment or their views or their understanding of the world from the Today programme or from ITV News or from Channel 4 News or from Newsnight, and they're not going to sit down at 10:30. They're going to get their primary source of information about the world from their social platforms, from the things that their peers share, from the things that they hear about. That's going to be their world. So, the thing about a generational shift is that, fundamentally, you're either on one side or you're on the other. I just want a very quick show of hands for who knows why this slide is funny. Everybody, okay, I could have been that mum, I could have been that mum, but actually, living the cool life I have, I like an infinite scroll, I've got one thumb and that's all I need, so I can get a manicure and my hair done at the same time, because that's what a quality user experience is really all about. Now, just to finish up, I want to tell you a story about disruption. In my view, disruption is not when something amazing comes along and replaces something that was fundamentally flawed and badly engineered all along. In my view, disruption is what happens when something simple displaces a process that is so complex and so elegant and so well engineered that we almost don't realize that it's there. I was a newspaper journalist for many, many years. Then I joined a media organization that had newspapers, magazines, and television, and now I'm in a digital business. And I hear this phrase amongst people talking about the futures of any one of those businesses. And that phrase is, people will always read newspapers, really, and people will always watch television. And I think those things are up for debate. When I sat in a media organization, what I understood about newspapers is that if you're in the newspaper business, you're actually in the baguette business. You make baguettes. You have to bake a baguette. You have to bake a baguette with paper that you buy by the ton, which, by the way, is a commodity price over which you have absolutely no control and will affect your P&L, even though you have absolutely no control over it. You have to get a £100 million colour baguette baker to print your papers, and you have to have a factory that can distribute those papers, and outside that factory there's got to be a slip road to take you to the M1 because you're in the diesel business, and you have to get your baguettes to 80,000 retailers by 7 o'clock in the morning, and that's your job. That's the business that you're in. And your baguette's got to be there by 7 o'clock, and by 2:30 they're looking a little bit stale. That's the baguette business. And I think that my experience of journalists who I love is that this process is so simple, we don't even understand it. We think that the elves and the shoemakers deliver newspapers every day because that's how simple and elegant and easy newspaper publishers have made it look. And you know something? It's none of those things. It's not easy. So this is a slide about these two guys are from the 1850s in London, and they deliver ice. In the 1850s, if you wanted to keep your food cold, the ice guys would come to you. They'd get to you by 8:30 in the morning, and they'd deliver several loads of ice a day. And this is how butchers, fishmongers in the 1850s managed to keep their trade going. The ice trade actually started in about 1806. Somebody had the idea that you could carve up frozen canal ice, tow it to London, and use it to keep things cold. Now, the only problem was, it turns out that frozen canal ice has all sorts of stuff in it, like dead dogs, dead birds, dead people, dead all sorts of stuff. And so part of the problem was that when people made ice cream out of it, it brought cholera to London. But not to be deterred, because these guys are not quitters, they decided that actually what they needed was a high quality product. So they decided to import ice from Norway. Can you imagine? You're importing frozen lake ice from Norway, comes to England by boat, not in the era of refrigeration, comes by boat, it goes up, comes to Rotherhithe, goes up the canal system, arrives at Regent's Park, and there's an ice pit. They built an ice pit 100 feet deep and 60 feet wide, and that was where you got your ice. And by the 1850s, Norway exported 1 million tons of ice a year. There was a guy in Canada called Frederick Tudor who used monopolistic supply trade routes to get ice from Canada to Cuba, to South America, to the east coast of America, to India, and to China. The global ice trade was supply chain management of a level that I think, rivals the pyramids in its skill and execution, because ice, as you know, forget baguettes, ice is a very perishable product. And the reason they invested all this money, all this effort, all this time, all this wisdom and excellence into the process, because they made a bet. They made a bet that people will always need ice. People will always need ice. That was the basis. That was the backbone expectation of this business. And here's the funny thing. People didn't need ice. They needed to keep things cold. And they made the wrong bet. And by 1920, American households had refrigeration technology. That was the end of the ice trade. That was the end of this global pinnacle of now forgotten excellence, which, I think every time something like this dies, a bit of us dies. But their model was disrupted. And, the point of telling that story is that these guys made a bet. All of us in this room are making a bet. To some extent, we're a little bit like these guys. And, I ask myself all the time, and we ask ourselves as a business, what's the bet that we're making? What's the business that we're in? Because everything is changing all the time, and we need to know the answer to that question. For us, the bet that we're making is that young audiences will always want content that is relevant to them, and they'll want it delivered in the ways that they want to receive it. We might be right, we might be wrong, we've got a lot to learn as a business, but that's the bet we're making, and we're making that bet at the most transparent period in the human record in terms of understanding what people like and what people want to do. So that's the bet that we're taking. We might win, we might lose, but we're going to roll the dice. And I love talking to you about it. Thank you very much.
When Mimi and I were sort of going through the prep for today, I said, one thing about companies like you guys is that I think there's, the first question a lot of people ask, particularly publishers, is there a strategic risk in investing heavily in a social platform over which you don't have some, complete control? Do you feel that, an algorithm tweak could wipe out your business in terms of what people see, or how do you sort of confront that?
I think the price of diesel can fundamentally affect your business in ways that you don't control. I think that traffic problems on the M1 can fundamentally affect the quality of your product experience, and you're not in control. I think retailer margins and distribution can always affect your business. I think distribution is on terms that are more generous and more and allow us to deliver better and understand what better content ever. So, you know, I felt the pain of real things that affected your distribution that you had no control of. I actually think that we have the ability to create content that works in an ecology of platforms, and all those platforms are different. The content that we create for Snapchat or Instagram is very different. We want to be where our audience is, and actually I think that there's a symbiotic relationship with all these platforms that is about they want content that's optimum for their audience, and we want content that we create that's optimum for their audience. So actually, I think we're in an incredibly benevolent environment, and you know, those problems are just pretend problems compared to people who never actually had to deal with, you know, publishers have dealt with much bigger problems.
Okay, because we had to start a little bit late, I think we're a little bit pushed for time. So maybe, do we have any audience question? Maybe we could take one audience question if there is one? No? Excellent. You're happy with our timekeeping. Was there anyone? I didn't miss anyone, did I? No. Cheers. Thanks very much, Mimi.
Thank you.
Cheers. Great. Thank you.